Mr. Chair, Jenna Meyer, Revisor Statutes Office. And so that is actually the statute that is in the bill. And so when it says except as provided, it means unless you have a medical or religious exemption as laid out in those statutes.
So then just for clarification, so then people already have religious exemptions in the bill,
So
vaccines.
thank you, Mr. Chair. In current law, that's in 72, 62, 62, and 65, 508, there is a limited religious exemption for members of a religious denomination whose teachings are opposed to vaccinations. And the bill, Senate Bill 315, expands that religious exemption to be essentially any person who has a sincerely held religious belief. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Okay.
No. Are you kidding?
All right, very good. Thank you very much for making time. Committee, welcome. Comfreys, or no, sorry, no Comfreys, just committee members. Thank you very much. I'm so used to doing committees. Okay, so just for the start is, just Senate Bill 6 was amended into House Bill 2390. Okay, and so with that, go ahead.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to mention with House Bill 2390, it's our preference that we use the Senate version. Originally, the version had fentanyl strips, and of course, as you know, those are being addressed into the conference committee and through judiciary, where we felt it best fit. And also had a 26-member board that we felt was unnecessary. So in working with the Secretary's office as well as law enforcement, wanted to make sure they had all the information that they needed to be able to review and research the overdose deaths. And so that is what was remaining in the Senate bill. And so the fentanyl and the board were removed in 2390. And then we added 6.
Okay, very good. So, and that's a substitute. So just a quick question here, and it's probably something that, so I'm looking on page 4, and it references, the Secretary of Health and Environment shall not carry out provisions of subsection A or B in a manner that conflicts. So I look at the previous page, where would A be?
I'm sorry, yeah, that might be a question for the revisor.
That would be on line 16 of page 3, is where it starts.
Clear back to the start.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, what page are you on?
Okay, so I guess I didn't go far enough back. So on the top of page 4, it references A and B. So on the page here, I was looking at B, and then A would be on what line? Jenna?
It's on line 16, so it's right after the statutory
Oh,
citation,
okay.
65101.
All right.
Okay.
So this whole section is part of,
Yes, so everything that you see on section 2 on page 3 would be included in that language under C.
okay, very good. I knew there was a good answer for that.
Yes, so the question was the prohibition in subsection C, what does that apply to? And it would apply to all of the language in subsections A and B, which would be on page 3, lines 16 through 43. And in carrying out those duties under A and B, the secretary would not be able to conflict with any other statutes or expand authority, the secretary's authority.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, the purpose of 6 is that we felt that the purpose of the Secretary's office, medical officers, et cetera, were to review things for us, research, anything having to do with public health, to consider, put all of that together, educate us, and then recommend, and not mandate. And so that's what you see that was stricken, just had to do with mandates.
Okay.
That was what 6 is. And 6 is already in 2390.
Any questions? Further questions? Okay, well, that, I'm going to ask the revisor to run through 314 then. Jenna, can you run through 314 with us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jenna Moy, Revisor Statutes Office. Senate Bill 314 amends 2 sections of existing law. The first one is 65508, and the second is 726262. It amends them in the same way. These 2 statutes specify that clarify the necessary vaccinations that are required to attend either a daycare or a school. And the bill would prohibit the Secretary of Health and Environment from requiring a COVID-19 vaccination in order to attend either a daycare or a school.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, in our discussions with the secretary, she told us twice in committee she had no intention of ever doing that, even though the CDC has a recommendation, no intention of mandating the COVID vaccine for children. This just basically codifies that. And again, she may not be the only secretary someday.
And that's my concern. Committee questions? So again, just to be clear, this just involves COVID vaccines. 314, okay, just to be clear. Okay. Committee, any questions before we move on to 315? Seeing none? Jenna, can you run over 315 with us?
Yes, so Senate Bill 315 amends those same two statutes for the daycare and school vaccination requirements to attend those facilities. But the first statute that's amended was adopted during the special session in 2021, KSA 44663, and essentially the only change after committee amendments was on page 3 of that bill, lines 29 through 32, and it would specify that a student who is attending either a high school or a college, and as part of the required coursework for that program, they do I'd call it an internship or a clinical rotation at a medical care facility providing healthcare services, that student could not be required to get a COVID-19 vaccination in order to complete their coursework. And the sections 2 and 3 amend those daycare and school vaccination requirements in the same way, and that would be to expand the religious exemption language. And so the current language in statute states that you have to be an adherent of a religious denomination whose teachings are opposed to vaccination. This would change that language to just require a statement from at least one parent that this vaccination requirement would violate the sincerely held religious beliefs of the parent or guardian, and the daycare, the child care facility, or the school could not inquire into the sincerity of that request. And it does that for both of those statutes. Oh, and I should make it clear that this would apply to all of the required vaccinations. This is not just COVID-19, the way it's amended in 315. So any vaccination that's required by the secretary to attend a daycare or a school facility, and the religious exemption would be expanded.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, the purpose of 315 was merely to make sure during the time when we did have COVID, we had somebody who brought in a 3-page document saying that if you say you want a religious exemption, then you need to fill this out. We need the name of your church. We need the name of your pastor and their contact information. We need to know how long you've been attending this church. Where in the Bible does it say that you need this religious exemption? And it's just to give that same clarification that if someone asks for a religious exemption, that they are granted the religious exemption without question. And I will state here, as I stated in committee and on the House and on the Senate floor, there are some people who are like, are you an anti-vaxxer? Of course not. My children had their immunization. I had my COVID shot. It has nothing to do with this. This has to do with those who have religiously held beliefs so that they don't feel like that they are questioned about anything having to do with their religious beliefs, but that would be accepted.
And if I may, Madam Chair, thankfully a researcher reminded me, there's also provision in Senate Bill 315 that would repeal an existing statute requiring meningitis vaccinations at college campuses, or for students living in on-campus housing at colleges.
And our purpose for that was, again, going back to the non-mandating. However, and I would be happy to visit with my team here, but we would be happy in the spirit of compromise to remove the meningitis language.
I think our team would appreciate that. Okay, well, I think that gives us a pretty good overview of where you guys are at. Oh, Pat, I'm sorry. Senator, I'm sorry, speaking of the mic. Oh, sorry.
Representative Carpenter, you're doing a great job. But and I appreciate that having Jenna do an update, but the chairman of Senate Public Health, but that religious belief is beyond, which now in this bill 315 is beyond religious belief. So if you look on page 6, as used in this section, religious beliefs includes, but is not limited to, theistic and non-theistic moral and ethical beliefs as to what is right and wrong that are sincerely held with the strength of traditional religious views. So this is taking the term of religious well beyond religious belief. And I have to disagree with my chair in that schools are requiring that kind of documentation. And I think this is an overreach to say that that's what's happening in Kansas with all of our daycares and schools. We have to be, I think, respective of the importance of providing for the health of our children and the safety within our daycares and our schools. And this bill definitely goes against that, particularly when you think about daycares and you have children under the age of 2 within daycare, and they have, if you don't have herd immunity going on, they are being exposed now to diseases that they have no immunity to. And so it puts those facilities in a very dire situation, as well as our school settings as well. So this bill basically leaves it wide open when it comes to vaccinations among our children. And Kansans overwhelmingly support vaccinations in Kansas, and this bill goes definitely against that. I'm looking at page 6, I'm looking at lines 39 through 42.
It's in both places, since
Okay,
there's
thank
2
you.
statutes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jen, it's correct. It's at the top of the page, and it's also at the bottom of the page as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've had a little bit of time to digest all of these now, and just if they were all enacted together, it would put us in a position where potentially more students would not get vaccinated because they can just write this, what is it? Statement And then if a child does come to school with the measles, my child's school can no longer notify me that he was sitting next to somebody with measles. So I no longer would be provided that information, and we could be exposed. And this is a highly infectious disease. Is that how these would combine and work together?
Since people are able to, or parents are able to have a medical exemption or a religious exemption at school, a child may be sitting next to your child currently that has not been immunized. Again, I'm not against immunizations, just saying that could currently happen.
Absolutely, but if a child does go home sick and it ends up being the measles, then they would notify the school nurse, and then the school would get in touch with me to let me know there's been an exposure. And then we would no longer know that. And I understand that they could be sitting next to people who are unvaccinated, absolutely, but I'm concerned that this would lead to substantially, potentially less vaccinated students attending school, and that really makes me scared about outbreaks of infectious disease. And then we would not be informing families so that they could stay home, and then we also would have a provision where they couldn't close the school if there is an infectious disease outbreak.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'm reading from the Kansas Immunization Law Religious Exemption Form from Shawnee Heights School District 4450. And it states, children with a religious exemption shall be permitted to attend school except in the case of a vaccine preventable disease outbreak in the school. All susceptible students will be excluded from school based on public health officials' determination that the school is a primary site for disease exposure, transmission, and spread to the community. Students excluded from school for this reason will not be able to return to school until, 1, the danger of the outbreak has passed as determined by the local public health officials. 2, the student becomes ill with the disease and completely recovers. Or 3, the student is immunized. And it does go on to state that parents or guardians seeking an exemption on the basis that immunizations would be contrary to their religious beliefs of the child should complete the following statement and return it to school. It barely states, I hereby assert that the student is an adherent of a religious denomination whose religious teachings are opposed to such tests or inoculations. Therefore, and it's mentioning or referencing section 725209. And so I just want to also clarify, if I may, Mr. Chair, that as something that Senator Petty said was, if I gave that impression, it was certainly not my intention that all schools are not accepting or asking for lots of information. I was referencing an employer has done that before, and that was during the COVID outbreak. And so people are just wanting to make sure that their religious exemption is heard, and not to question which of their religious beliefs. We heard in committee, and I think also on the floor, people saying, I'm non-denominational, so what did they do with that? That's why it's changed to, and I think this was taken from another state that had done this, but I don't name the state, which is the sincerely held beliefs of the individual.
And that language is actually taken from section 1 of 315. It mirrors the employer exemption language.
I do believe if Senate Bill 6 is passed, there is no longer any authority from the Health Department or the Secretary of Health and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Representative Hoy, you were saying in conjunction, so are you referencing if we passed 315 and then Senate Bill 6 takes out teacher or school administrator? Is that why you were saying that? And I would kind of like to understand how those go together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is that with SB 6, sorry, let me get back to the page. Well, it's in 2390. SB 6 is in 2390. And there's my understanding, provision that, well, maybe I have it in the wrong one, but, no, I think it's in that one where teachers and school administrators would not be able to report diseases. So even 315 aside, even SB 315 aside, if somebody comes to school with an infectious disease, and we have a list of the vaccines here that are required, they come with measles, hepatitis, meningitis, mumps, we would no longer, as parents, be informed that our child was exposed to an infectious disease.
Mr. Chair, could you tell me where it says they are not allowed to do this?
Well, that was that's what I wrote down in my notes. So if I am incorrect, I would appreciate if we could have the reviser weigh in. That was my understanding in a briefing of what that did.
Jennifer, could you clarify?
Thank you, I guess, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. So the provisions that are in play here, the first one is Section 4 of 2390, which is KSA 65118. And this provision currently states that there's a number of healthcare professionals as well as.
Excuse me, Jenna. Could you give us, so we can follow along, could you give us the page number and line?
Yes, sorry, page 4, and this section starts on line 26. And this section lists out the individuals who are required by law to report those infectious or contagious diseases. In lines 31 and 32, it strikes a teacher or school administrator. So according to this section, they would not be required to notify the county or joint health. They would no longer be required to move up the chain those known cases of infectious or contagious diseases. However, in section 6 of the bill, where let's see, this would start on page 6, the Secretary of Health and Environment currently has the statutory obligation to make a list of infectious or contagious diseases. This bill strikes that authority, so that list of infectious or contagious diseases would no longer exist. And so until the legislature enacts a list, the diseases that you would report on, it's unclear if any, what notifications may be made or not made if there is no list in existence of infectious or contagious diseases.
So to be clear, the schools are, of course, allowed to notify parents. They're allowed to contact the Secretary of Health. They're just not required, because our feeling was all of these other folks are health providers. And that's section 4 on page 4. So of course they could still report that to anyone, they're just not required. And then what was mentioned on page 6, that we are not requiring the secretary to make the list, but the secretary can most certainly make the list.
So the secretary would no longer have the authority under the law to put that in rules and regulations. The secretary would instead make a list and give it to the legislature, and then you could pass it, not pass it, pass it in part.
Thank you.